This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The African Union intensifies diplomatic efforts to end the conflict in Ethiopia. France officially hands over 26 looted artworks to Benin. And more countries relax restrictions as some parts of the world report record COVID-19 cases. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in business news is Rama.
That's right, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the next half hour. Authorities in Zimbabwe are considering introducing the use of Bitcoin as part of efforts to solve the country's currency crisis. And leading processor makers have handed over data to the US government in efforts to address the global shortage in semiconductors. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. We begin this news hour with some breaking news where more than a dozen Ethiopian staffers working for the United Nations have been arrested in Addis Ababa in raids carried out under a state of emergency. Well, world leaders are concerned that time is running out to stop the fighting in Ethiopia. Officials from the African Union and the United States said on Monday that there was a small window of opportunity to end the violence. The United Nations warns that Ethiopia is in danger of descending further into a civil war. An envoy from the U.S. has returned to Addis Ababa for talks with an envoy from the African Union. The AU has been meeting with the anti-government group to try to de-escalate tensions by the end of the week. Sarah Walton has more.
Monday's emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss the situation in Ethiopia was pushed back from Friday after negotiations on a joint statement to condemn fighting in the country delayed proceedings. Today, the UN Security Council was briefed on the current situation in Tigray, where fighting between anti-government groups and federal troops has now been going on for more than a year. The UN's Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs told the meeting that the conflict has reached disastrous proportions and that the fighting places the future of the country and its people, as well as the stability of the wider Horn of African region, in grave uncertainty.
The risk of Ethiopia descending into a widening civil war is only too real. That would bring about a humanitarian catastrophe and consume the future of such an important country.
The Security Council also received a briefing from the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, who is now the African Union's representative for the Horn of Africa. He recently visited Tigray, and on Tuesday he'll travel to the surrounding areas of Amhara and Afar to meet with anti-government groups to discuss humanitarian access and the withdrawal of troops. He said he hoped to have a plan of action for that by the end of the week. During the debate that followed, the representatives for the US and Ireland welcomed the joint statement released on Friday, but said the Security Council had remained silent for too long as fighting intensified in the country. Meanwhile, China's representative at the UN, Ambassador Zhang Jun, backed demands for an immediate end to hostilities and called for the African Union to be given time and space to carry out its diplomatic efforts. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
Well, let's revisit that breaking news we began with at the top of the hour. More than a dozen Ethiopian staffers working for the United Nations have been arrested in Addis Ababa in raids carried out under a state of emergency. Well, let's cross over to Giram Chala, who is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia for us. Giram, hi. What more details do you have for us from Addis?
Well, as you've said, dozens of UN staff have been arrested in this country. We've been trying to speak to the government communication service, and they have told us almost nothing. There's no official response so far, but we know that there's an investigation going on, and we also know that the United Nations security people have detained. But you have to understand that with the current state of emergency situation, the committee and also the government is taking things seriously. And we're expecting that there's going to be an answer that's going to come out as to why these people have been arrested. and also what's going to be the next course of action. But for now, we know that we're waiting for the response, as I said earlier.
Thank you so much for that, Girim. Girim Chala speaking to us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Well, as tensions keep rising in Ethiopia due to continued fighting in the north, the government is blaming foreign interference for some of the problems in the affected region. Diplomatic efforts to end the conflict between the government and TPLF rebels have not been successful so far, even as the United States raised concerns about possible gross human rights violations in Ethiopia. CGTN's Nick Mudimba reports.
The ongoing conflict in Tigray, which started in November 2020, has caught the attention of the U.S. The U.S. has been calling for negotiations between the government and the TPLF, but Ethiopia has not agreed to talks with the group, which it has labeled as terrorist. The U.S. sent its envoy Jeffrey Feltman to try and resolve the conflict, but this is yet to bear fruits.
We have seen reports that those with Tigrayan ethnicity are coming under are being harassed or worse. Of course, those reports are concerning. It is part of the reason why we have called for an immediate cessation of hostilities, knowing that the potential for intercommunal violence remains high. We are deeply concerned about the potential for escalating intercommunal violence. It is why we are engaged with a number of actors, a number of officials in the Ethiopian government, why we have engaged with the TPLF, why we are working at this very concertedly.
Ethiopian Americans who support Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government protested against U.S. foreign policy in front of the White House, saying that Biden administration's calls for talks between Addis Ababa and the Tigray People's Liberation Front was misinformed and fueled by incorrect reporting by the Western media.
What U.S. is doing is punitive. They're trying to delist Ethiopia from AGOA. They're passing military sanctions and different things and trying to squeeze arms. They've done it in Libya. They've done it in Syria. And Syria and Libya are worse off than they were before, so we don't want the same thing to happen in Ethiopia.
In an open letter to U.S. President Joe Biden, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed touched on interference in his letter by saying, and I quote, "African nations that have broken free from the shackles of colonialism starting from the 1950s have continued to resist the chains of neocolonialism that is manifesting itself in various overt and covert ways." End of quote. A clear message that the country wants to sort out its own problems without foreign interference.
If the government of Ethiopia and the Tigray People's Liberation Front take meaningful steps to enter into talks without preconditions and allow unhindered humanitarian assistance, the United States is prepared to mobilize assistance for Ethiopia to recover and revitalize its economy and build a future for its people. Otherwise, we will impose targeted sanctions against a range of responsible individuals and entities.
The United States ordered non-emergency government employees and their families to leave Ethiopia and advised other U.S. citizens to depart immediately. The U.S. warning came a day after the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, met with Ethiopia's Prime Minister amid growing calls for an immediate ceasefire and talks. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's turn over to other news that's making headlines this hour. France has handed back 26 treasures that were looted from Benin during colonial times. President Emmanuel Macron and his counterpart from Benin, Patrice Talon, met in Paris on Tuesday and formally sealed an agreement that would allow the looted royal treasures to be returned to Benin in the course of the week.
These art pieces were looted from the Kingdom of Dahomey 130 years ago by French forces. The snatched treasures have been on display in this museum in Paris. But as from Tuesday, they will be returned to their rightful owners, the country of Benin. This fulfills a promise made by President Emmanuel Macron to restore a lost part of Africa's heritage.
This is not just a symbolic moment, but a moving one, I must say, and a historical one. Indeed, we have just, with the President of the Republic of Benin, Patrice Talon, signed together a historic act that was so long awaited and desired. The signature by the Ministers of Culture of our two countries of an agreement of transfer of ownership, which constitutes the last phase of the process of restitution of the 26 works of the treasures of Abomey.
Benin President Patrice Talon was overcome by emotion at recovering the artifacts.
C'est le peuple béninois tout entier.
The restitution of the 26 works we are dedicating today is a step in the ambitious process of equity and restitution of the memorial heritages once extorted from the Kingdom of Benin territory by France. The emotion that grips me this morning is devastating. It is devastating because I have hoped, I have despaired, I have clung, and I have prayed to all the gods, all our ancestors, that you would be inspired, and they have.
The restitution calls culminated last year in a vote in the French Parliament. Lawmakers overwhelmingly backed returning a group of artifacts to Benin and Senegal. The restitution is part of a drive by Macron to improve his country's image in Africa. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Sierra Leone's health facilities are struggling to deal with survivors of Friday's tanker explosion. Authorities fear blood donations will run out soon as medical needs increase by the day. There's an urgent appeal for donations to treat more than 100 burn victims admitted to hospitals. Eric Kawa reports from Freetown.
A country in mourning. It's been an unbearable few days for friends and family members of victims of Friday's tragic incident. Alusign lawyer Kano is a relative to one of the victims who died in the early hours of Monday.
I lost my big brother in Peking.
I lost my elder brother's son in the incident at PMB Wellington. He was a motorbike rider. He was stranded in the traffic and got trapped in the fire. The passenger and her child died on the spot, and we lost him earlier on Monday.
Sayo Nakele Toure was able to identify the remains of his younger brother and recount his ordeals.
It be so serious that the young man not be able for sustain. It be so serious. He born seriously. So he not be able for sustain the pain. He die.
I am standing outside the Connaught Hospital in Freetown, a reference center where many of the victims are admitted. This place also hosts a mortuary center. Many family members are here to identify their loved ones. It is still challenging to identify victims who suffered from the tragic incident. The hospital care manager at Connaught Hospital, Dr. Mustafa Kaba, says they are in urgent need of more medical supplies like oxygen saturation machines.
Well, the latest so far is that we received a lot of patients who came into the facility with severe injuries due to the fire incident. We have been trying to resuscitate them, stabilize them, and give them the appropriate medications they need and treatment. So this is what we've been doing.
The World Health Organization has donated 6.6 tons of medical emergency supplies as part of an immediate response to the disaster. There is more coming from local and international organizations. In the meantime, government has announced 3 days of national mourning and set up a disaster management task force. For a country that's been faced with numerous challenges and currently recovering from the 2014 Ebola pandemic, the most pressing issue is improvement in health infrastructure to not only handle disaster, but strengthen the healthcare sector. Eric Kawa, Freetown, Sierra Leone for CGTN.
Well, let's not turn to the latest on the coronavirus. The African continent has a total of 8,548,575 COVID-19 cases and 219,793 reported deaths. When broken down into the regions, according to the Africa Center for Disease Control, the central part of Africa reported 207,000 infections and 3,900,000 people were reported to have died from the virus. West Africa had 665,000 cases and 10,000 deaths. In the eastern part of the continent, they were just over 23,000 deaths and 1.1 million confirmed cases. North Africa was reported to have 2.6 million infections and just over 71,000 deaths. Finally, Southern Africa still has the highest number of COVID-19 infections. The cases stand at 3.9 million with just over 111,000 reported deaths. In October, however, an assessment by the World Health Organization showed that only 1 in 7 COVID-19 infections were being detected on the African continent. This, they said, was due to inadequate testing. The Chinese mainland has reported 43 new locally transmitted COVID-19 cases. Of the new local cases, North China's Hebei province recorded the biggest number of 12, followed by the northeastern province of Heilongjiang and the southwestern province of Sichuan. There were 19 new imported cases. The total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases on the mainland stood at 97,885. More than 2.3 billion doses of vaccine have now been administered on the Chinese mainland. Hong Kong has recorded a total of 12,368 confirmed cases. 77 cases have been reported in Macau since the pandemic began, and 16,445 cases have been reported in Taiwan. Well, many countries have resumed trade and tourism. The United States, for example, is now expecting a surge of travelers after reopening its borders on Monday. This comes as global COVID cases have reached 250 million, with Eastern Europe seeing record outbreaks. Where does the world stand now in the battle against COVID-19? Let's explore the data with Chuck Tint.
Coronavirus infections are down and hopes are up. An analysis conducted by Reuters has shown the daily average number of cases falling by 36% over the past 3 months. In Japan alone, cases have dropped dramatically. From over 5,000 a day during a recent wave in August, new infections are now down to 1 digit, with 9 recorded on Monday. As for deaths, it recorded a new milestone on Sunday, reporting 0 for the first time in 15 months. It's now gradually easing border restrictions. The United States, too. America ended its 20-month travel ban, allowing entry of vaccinated travelers, including those from Europe. But the continent is once again becoming the epicenter of the pandemic. More than half of all new infections reported worldwide are from European countries, with 1 million new infections detected about every 4 days. Germany, which moved to relax restrictions in the first half of this year, is now seeing the infection rate rising to its highest level since the beginning of the pandemic. Infections in Russia, Ukraine, and Greece are at or near record levels. Globally, the virus is still infecting 50 million people every 90 days due to the highly transmissible Delta variant. By contrast, it took nearly a year to record the first 50 million COVID cases. As winter sets in, experts warn that colder weather and upcoming holiday gatherings could increase cases. Vaccines remain key in the fight against the pandemic, but vaccination programs, experts and leaders say, need to be improved, particularly in the least wealthy countries. Data shows that more than half of the world's population has yet to receive a single dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. The World Health Organization and other aid groups last month appealed to leaders of the world's 20 biggest economies to fund a $23.4 billion plan to bring COVID-19 vaccines, tests, and drugs to poorer countries in the next 12 months. Chuck Tinte, CGTN.
The UK says that it will recognize COVID-19 vaccines in the World Health Organization's emergency use list later this month. The country will add China's Sinovac and Sinopharm to its approved list of vaccines for inbound travelers. The move will come into effect from November the 22nd and will benefit fully vaccinated people from countries including the UAE and Malaysia. India's Covaxin will also be added to that list. Let's now take a show break. More in Africa Live when we return, including we tell you how one unique project is helping South Africans to remember victims of COVID-19. And high cost of cooking gas forcing many Nigerians to use charcoal and firewood.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
we celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Tirop, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. We head over to South Africa, where South Africans are attaching blue and white ribbons to the fence of a church in Johannesburg as a sign to mourn their loved ones who died of COVID-19. Blue and white ribbons that flutter from the fence surrounding St. James Presbyterian Church in the suburb of Bedford Gardens provide a visual reminder of how many South Africans have died from the virus. CGTN's Julissa Jamela has more.
It's a unique concept that is meant to pay respect and commemorate those who have lost their lives to the COVID-19 pandemic. Each blue ribbon here represents 10 victims and each white ribbon represents 1 victim. Dominique Burslem Rothero is the one who started this project. She explains.
Initially, we started with the white ribbons, which represented 1 person for each COVID death. And then as time went by, it just became too expensive for us to maintain. And eventually we had to go into doing 10 people for every blue ribbon. And that's how we had to start introducing a blue ribbon for every 10 people.
Burslem Rothero says this project is not necessarily only about those who have lost their lives to the pandemic.
I came up with the idea of putting ribbons on the fence. Meeting with the families, it was very obvious to me that it wasn't just the people that had passed away that we were representing, but these families that we were meeting were really traumatized. It wasn't even that they were grieving at that time. They were really traumatized by the whole experience, and that I think the grieving process was only going to happen much later for them. So for me, the ribbons represented a whole family, not just the person that had passed away.
Reverend Gavin Locke is the leader of the St. James Presbyterian Church and welcomes this display.
It's also an encouragement to folk that their loved ones have not been forgotten. You know, when it started out and there were 21 deaths, you could almost keep track of that. But now that we're approaching, I think we're heading towards about 90,000 at this stage. The danger is that people just become a number. And if you drive past, you see that there are individual ribbons. They're not just numbers.
The church fence isn't big enough to keep pace, so officials have resorted to tying ribbons on both sides of the railings.
I must confess, we never anticipated that our fence would be as covered with white ribbons as they are now. But at that time, that was our initial motivation. So at the moment, how we're managing that is we're simply putting ribbons in between the existing ribbons in the most functional way. But we do have a large capacity. We've only used up about 1/3 of our fence size. So the reason we chose that particular side of the fence is because it faces the road. And so often we find people driving past and they stop and they look at the ribbons.
The church will continue to pay respects to those who have been affected by the worldwide virus. Julissa Jamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We'll head over to West Africa now, where in Nigeria, the high price of liquid petroleum gas, also known as LPG, is forcing many street vendors to use wood and charcoal for cooking. CGTN's Linda Mtangana has the details.
Nigerians have been lining up to buy Aduni Abdul's black-eyed peas steamed in leaves for more than a decade. 5 years ago, a campaign aiming to improve public health made Aduni ditch using wood and charcoal to cook the delicacy. But the high prices for smokeless liquid petroleum gas, also known as LPG, forced her to turn back to using it in her cook stand.
Gas is costly. That is why I'm using firewood. If I don't use it, I will not be able to cook and sell to feed my family. I know charcoal causes illnesses. The smoke normally causes chest pain, but since there is no alternative, I have to use it.
Burning LPG emits around 50% less carbon than charcoal and 20% less than heating oil. And switching to the gas is a central plank of carbon reduction plans in Nigeria. LPG prices have, however, risen by 60% over the past year in the country, making it unaffordable for the average Nigerian.
They've been flaring gas in this country for years now, decades. And we need this gas for cooking. But you see, they don't want to invest in liquefying the natural gas and purifying it for domestic use.
According to the International Energy Agency, Nigeria's LPG use has been growing quickly. But in 2018, only about 5% of Nigerians used LPG for cooking. 73% relied on charcoal or biomass like wood.
People now come more to charcoal. Because I can even recall when one of my customers were saying gas is more expensive now, that we should be packing more charcoal because he's coming to buy more charcoal because he can't afford the gas.
Despite having extensive gas reserves, Nigeria lacks the infrastructure to exploit much of it. The country burns about 400 million cubic feet of gas as waste every year. Lindim Tongana, CGTN.
World leaders have been discussing ways to mitigate climate change, which is already affecting communities worldwide. But some traditional communities may have already been coping with these changes by relying purely on their indigenous knowledge. But how relevant is this traditional information in the face of the changing climate? CGTN's Penina Karube visited a Maasai community in Kenya's Kajiado County and now reports.
Blistering morning sun reflects brightly on the bare landscape. On the ground, a vastness of bare earth stretches out endlessly. This is Kajiado County. Known as a semi-arid region, it has not received much rain this year and is currently experiencing drought. Kajiado County is known for pastoralism. In this harsh weather, goats roam freely looking for something, anything to eat. The Maasai community, which is predominant in this region, has learned to survive in this harsh environment. It is here that we find John Waupari, one of the Maasai elders, as he heads to meet with other elders at the home of the former area chief. The elders are also joined by meteorologist John Rotich, who is the county's director of meteorological services. The discussion that follows next is both interesting and intriguing. They are comparing notes on the weather forecasts from the elders and the meteorological department. Each side gives details of what they have studied and what the findings are. The outcomes of this discussion will prove crucial to the community's next steps in the coming days and weeks. But the elders are optimistic. After almost a year of no rain, relief is coming and coming soon. How they're able to tell that is a different kind of science, studied for centuries. A science that uses everything in the surrounding environment, from the sky to animals and even plants.
This is an indicator the rains are near. You can't see these leaves any other time except when the rains are approaching. It might rain a week or two from now.
In this land, almost every plant has a story to tell. John says these tiny shrubs only sprout a few weeks before the onset of rains. They also observe flowers from different trees, when they bloom and the different colors they have, all of which are useful in determining the weather patterns. Animals too are a useful resource of climate prediction. The elders slaughter a goat and study the insides of its stomach. The patterns of the veins and blood flow determines if they will have a good or bad season. And then there are the tiny creatures such as termites, which are useful in giving more immediate forecasts, narrowing it down to days. John explains that patterns such as these tiny termite mounds above the ground are a good indication that the area will receive rains in just a few days.
We also study the stars. Every morning and evening the elders study them. There are 2 stars in particular that we study, and depending on their movement, we are able to determine how weather will be. It will be 2 years now since we last saw them, but of late we've been spotting them. They are moving towards each other, and as soon as they cross each other, it will rain.
It may not sound like much compared to complex scientific instruments that are currently used globally, but such is the trust in this indigenous knowledge that the Maasai community has clung to it over the years.
My father died recently. He was 100 years old when he died. So he had a lot of knowledge, and he would teach me how to apply it in order for me to be able to care for the animals better, to know if it will rain and also when there will be a drought.
And meetings such as this one ensure that knowledge is passed on to the younger generation. It is difficult to imagine any accurate weather forecasts could be made using the natural flora and fauna of such a harsh environment. But this knowledge has sustained the local communities. It has also piqued the interest of the country's meteorological department. With technology becoming more advanced and widespread, some scientists insist indigenous knowledge still has its place in climate prediction and adaptation.
We also add, or we incorporate that knowledge, the skills they have, and the network they have, so that the two knowledges, they can be acceptable and they can penetrate, and the user can get a better use and also get more knowledge or more parameters which are incorporated, like rainfall amounts, rainfall duration, rainfall onset, and the cessation of the rains.
It is the reason why Kenya's meteorological department is collaborating with local community elders, such as these ones, to ensure such communities are cushioned against the effects of the constantly changing climate. But that collaboration has taken years to nurture.
Scientists don't listen to us. They dismiss us and they say we don't know anything. They think because they are educated, their instruments are better than our knowledge. If only they could collaborate with us, we'd also be able to contribute to their knowledge.
Scientists like Rotich say, in the face of the changing climate, this indigenous knowledge cannot be ignored.
So going into the future, they are good in adaptation. They can teach us what the traditional knowledge knows about how to live in a harsher environment.
With the world scrambling for solutions to change the current climate cause, Kajiado County's Maasai community may already be contributing to that cause in their own small way. Penina Karibe, CGTN, in Kajiado County, Kenya.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you the latest in sports and more in Africa Live. But for now, let's take a look at what's happening in business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Authorities in Zimbabwe are considering introducing the use of Bitcoin in order to help resolve the country's currency crisis. And leading processor makers have handed over data to the US government in an effort to address a global shortage in semiconductors.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in the world of currencies. Zimbabwe's government is reportedly considering the adoption of decentralized cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, as legal payment options alongside the national currency. That's the Zimbabwean dollar. Sources tell us that discussions on legalizing Bitcoin payments are underway with private sector players. But the government is fearful that cryptocurrency could be exploited by bad actors to facilitate a whole host of malpractice like money laundering or to fund other illegal activities with little or no chance of being traced. Suggestions have been invited by individuals and companies under the private sector to participate in finalizing the rules around Bitcoin adoption in Zimbabwe. Now, just last month, Zimbabwe's leading industrialists had warned that the country's currency is in danger of collapsing as businesses resort to using the US dollar. In East Africa, Tanzania Central Bank has been taking measures to stabilize the banking industry, including merging a whole host of small banks with inadequate capital bases. Non-performing loans in Tanzania stood at 9.4% of the total loan book in March, nearly twice the target level of about 5%. Now, the proportion of bad loans stood at 10.5% in March 2020. The Bank of Tanzania says its investigations have found employees of some banks and financial institutions were directly responsible for, quote, issuing loans without following proper procedures, fraud, corruption, or other practices that are tantamount to a lack of integrity, end of quote. It said among other measures, commercial banks will also be required to take legal action against such employees, and the regulator will blacklist and prevent them from working in the financial sector in Tanzania. Onto a blend of ecological architecture now. A South African township community is repurposing plastic waste to build eco-friendly classrooms. Diana Musara runs an educational organization that offers after-school and Saturday classes to children in the small and under-resourced township of Diepsloot. Children were crammed into a single classroom, which sparked the idea of building a classroom, an entirely new one, made out of eco-bricks that are made from used cold drink bottles. Here's Julie Shai with the latest.
My name is Diana Musara. I'm the director for Kenya's Collection. Kenya's Collection is an organization that assists students with extra classes. These are the students from grade 0 up to grade 12. They are attending schools in Diepsloot.
Our children here, they are living in small areas like in a shack. A whole family lives in one space, so there is not enough space to study, to focus. They do not have access, to electricity, to internet and the likes.
The idea of now marrying environment and education came from the fact that we didn't have enough learning environment and classes for our children. What gave rise to Earthly Touch Foundation, instead of looking for zinc, which doesn't help from an environment point of view, we then decided to go for eco-bricks. In the township, there's plastic all over the place. So we then decided that we are now going to be repurposing plastic into building material. As we were constructing and building the eco-brick, our children were involved.
An eco-brick is a 2-liter plastic bottle filled with plastic. So your aim is to get 550 to 600 grams of weight. That makes sure that all the voids are out and your eco-brick is strong.
I knew about recycling, but taking action was a difficult task. But now I know a lot more about recycling. I've learned that we can turn litter into beautiful things.
actually took us was about 2 months to build the classroom. So the foundation, we used 4,000 bottles. And then the walls, we used 12,000 eco bricks. We managed to create about 20 jobs.
The class is unique in terms of the temperatures. During summer, it's not that hot, it's cool, and we're able to study. Like compared to the zinc classes, the temperatures when it's hot, also inside the class is hot, and it's hard, it's kind of hard to study inside.
We are actually planning another center so that we can help more kids in the community. Global warming and climate change is not going to choose whether you are rich or you are poor. We are all going to be affected. So our hope is to actually turn shacks into eco-brick homes.
Onto the world of tech now. Leading processor manufacturers from South Korea and other parts of the world have complied with the US government demands to hand over their data on semiconductor production. The US Department of Commerce threatened to invoke the Defense Production Act, the DPA, if the firms did not meet their November 8th deadline to provide that data. Jack Barton reports from Seoul.
We know they were essentially asked to provide everything, including trade secrets, including areas that are covered under confidentiality agreements with clients. So sort of industrial espionage with a hammer is the way some analysts are seeing it here. What SK Hynix has told us is that they have handed over information. They have also handed over information in the sort of sensitive area of inventories, but they've given basic inventories without detailing it down to the products, but they haven't handed over client lists. Samsung also saying they haven't handed over client lists and they haven't handed over inventories either. So, you know, we're still going to have to wait and see if that's going to be enough for the US. They've already sort of stated that it's not going to be, but whether if these companies can ramp up enough semiconductors to sort of take some of those bottlenecks out of the supply chain and keep Washington happy, or whether the Commerce Secretary over there, Gina Raimondo, who made the threat against the countries, is going to have to pull out a bigger tool from her toolbox that she mentioned to threaten the Korean firms with to hand over all their data.
Back into the continent now. Nigeria is working on beefing up economic ties with Cote d'Ivoire in an effort to create jobs for young people in both countries. It comes after the second edition of the Nigeria-COTE D'IVOIRE Binational Commission meeting, which was held over the weekend in Abidjan. CGTN's Tessa Makende has this report.
Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, says the collaborative efforts with Cote d'Ivoire would also go a long way to address migration of youth from both African nations. Osinbajo co-chaired the meeting with the Ivorian Prime Minister, Patrick Achi. He noted that as the countries have two of the largest economies in West Africa, more cooperation is required. The chair signed agreements that cover agriculture, digital economy, education, prevention of human trafficking, among others. Part of the agreement is that both countries should learn and collaborate in trading agricultural products internationally. Both countries lead in the production of some agricultural commodities like cocoa and coffee. In addition, Nigeria's Vice President says the countries are working on strengthening military ties and working more closely in maintaining peace and security of their region in order for business activities to thrive. Tessem Akendi, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
And one last story for you from Nigeria. Polo is gaining traction quite a bit over the last decade. With that comes the need for a whole host of accessories, everything from knee guards to boots. Local manufacturers are now tapping into the country's leather industry to make these accessories, both for the local market and others abroad. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has that story.
These are some of the finished products at 828, a leather crafting outlet in Nigeria's northwest Kaduna State. Kasim Abdul Salam Baba established the business 6 years ago, making shoes, wallets, belts and other leather accessories. The graduate of mathematics delved into making polo boots 2 years ago after identifying a high demand for it.
There was a huge gap because you can imagine getting a polo boot you have to send to as far as Argentina for it to be made, like the time, the duration it's been made, the distance, the cost and everything. So it was a huge gap in the market, and we saw that and we took that challenge. Almost 80 to 75% of the polo players in the north already knows about our brand, and since then they stopped patronizing the Argentine boots and started patronizing us.
Nigeria is one of the highest producers of leather and finished leather products in Africa, so Kasim sources all raw materials for his production locally. A pair of his boots sells for between $200 and $450. Now he's empowered over 120 people.
To impact knowledge, see how we can grow the economy in our own little way by providing job, see how we can expand to other countries. We've been doing training as part of our CSR to also build the society and bridge that gap of craftsmanship.
Since I started working here, I had a lot of experience because my boss would teach me a lot of things. Anywhere I go today, I can make a shoe, even if they aren't patterned. I know how to get a pattern for a shoe.
Nigeria's leather export stands at about $272 million, with the highest patronage from countries like Italy, Spain, India, South Asia and China. But lack of skilled manpower, weak infrastructure and poor funding continue to hamper growth. The Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, projects that the nation's leather industry can generate over $1 billion by 2025. With support from government, local manufacturers like Kasim hope to make African leather brands earn a global spot. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Kaduna, Nigeria.
And I'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In global business, we'll be heading over to South Africa. The country's finance minister, Enoch Godongwana, will be preparing to deliver his first ever medium-term budget statement later this week. What are his options for steering the economy out of its very shaky state, especially at a time when debt service is taking up nearly 20% rather, of available tax revenues? We'll explore that live from Johannesburg at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Rama. We'll see you then. Let's now take a short break and return. It's sport news, including the husband of slain Kenyan athlete Agnes Tirop ordered to take a mental health test.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find